The hottest place in any restaurant is the patch of floor right in front of the stove, where the heat rolls up off the flat top and lays itself across your face like a second skin. I have stood in that spot for 30 years. I was standing in it the night a famous man walked into my kitchen, looked clean past me at the young fellow stirring my pots, and decided that young fellow must be the one in charge. He had come to do me a favor. By the time I sent dessert out to his table, he understood he had walked in with the whole thing backward, and that the woman he had asked to go and fetch the chef was the only person in that building who could give him what he came for. I never once raised my voice. In my kitchen, the food does the talking. Let me back up and tell it right, the way my grandmother taught me to tell a thing, from the roux on up. My name is Verna Toussaint. I am 51 years old, and I am the chef and the owner of a restaurant called Philomena's down in New Orleans, on a corner where the streetcar line bends and the live oaks lean in over the sidewalk like they are trying to listen. I named the place for my grandmother, Philomena, who raised me on a cast iron skillet and a long-handled spoon, and a kind of patience I am still trying to live up to. If you have ever had somebody do you wrong at a job you were good at, somewhere you had earned your place, pour yourself something warm and sit with me a while. I think you are going to know this story before I finish telling it. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight and what you do with your two hands that the world has not quite learned to respect yet. Now, let me tell you what I mean when I say I am good at this. I did not come up easy, and I did not come up fast. My grandmother cooked for other people's families for most of her life, in kitchens where her name was never on anything. She would come home with her feet swollen and her back bent, and she would still stand at our little stove and make something out of almost nothing that could make a grown man cry into his napkin. She used to say the Lord gave her two gifts, a strong back and a good tongue, and only one of them was hers to keep. I watched her hands my whole childhood. I learned the Trinity before I learned my times tables. I learned that a roux is not a recipe. It is a relationship, and you cannot rush it, any more than you can rush a person into loving you. When she passed, she left me one thing that mattered, a black cast iron skillet, heavy as a tombstone, seasoned by 50 years of her hands until the surface shone like still water. You cannot buy that. People try. They sell you a brand new pan and call it seasoned, but seasoning is just time and attention, and there is no shortcut for either one. That skillet has cooked in every kitchen I have ever worked. It cooks the one dish that built my whole restaurant. I will get to that. I started at the bottom, the way you do, dishwasher, then prep, peeling shrimp until my fingers went numb, then garde-manger, then the line, then sous-chef, then the long, slow climb to running my own kitchen. I worked in rooms where I was the only black woman on the line and the only one anybody assumed was there to clean rather than cook. I worked doubles. I worked holidays. I worked through a marriage that did not survive the hours, and I made my peace with that a long time ago. Because the truth is, this kitchen has been the great love of my life, and I do not apologize for it anymore. 6 years ago, I opened Philomena's with money I had saved, one careful dollar at a time, and a loan I had to ask 3 banks for before one of them said yes. I took my grandmother's home cooking, the smothered chicken and the gumbo and the slow braised greens, and I gave it the respect that fine dining gives to a French sauce. White tablecloths, a wine list that takes the food seriously, plates that look like paintings but taste like Sunday. People said it would not work. People said folks would not pay that kind of money for what they could get at their auntie's house. People underestimate, I have learned, mostly out of habit. 2 years ago, a national food magazine put my gumbo on its cover. Last year, I stood on a stage in a borrowed dress and accepted a James Beard Award, which in my world is about as high as the mountain goes. I have cooked for a senator and for a man who just got out of prison and could not pay, and I fed them both the same, because my grandmother would have come back from glory to slap me if I did not. I tell you all of this not to boast. I tell you so that when I describe what happened next, you understand it was not happening to some timid little woman who did not know her own worth. It happened to a chef who had earned every inch of her kitchen, standing right in the middle of it. Let me tell you about my crew, because they matter to how this ends. A kitchen is not a building. It is a family that happens to sweat together. I've got a dishwasher named Ronell, who has been with me since the first week we opened, who hums church songs over the spray nozzle, and who I have watched grow from a skinny boy into a man with a baby girl of his own. I have got line cooks who came to me with nothing but hunger in them, who can now break down a whole fish with their eyes half closed. Every single night before the doors open, we sit down together at a table in the dining room and we eat family meal. And we say one word of thanks over it, because my grandmother would not have let any of us pick up a knife otherwise. When you have built a thing like that with your own two hands, you do not hand it to a stranger because he waved money at you and called your food surprising. And let me tell you how the gumbo got famous, since it is the very thing they came to take. 2 years back, a critic came in on a slow Tuesday, alone, no reservation under any name I recognized. He ordered the gumbo. I watched him from the pass take the first spoonful, and I watched him stop and set his spoon down on the cloth and just sit there a moment with his eyes closed. I have lived for that exact second my whole working life. The second a stranger tastes my grandmother's hands and forgets for one breath where he is. He wrote 1,000 words about that one bowl. He called it the truest thing he had eaten in 10 years. He never knew that I went and cried in the walk-in cooler after he left, standing between the milk crates in the cold, because the one person who should have read those words had been gone a long time by then, and all I wanted was to call her and tell her that her cooking had made a grown man go quiet in a fine dining room in New Orleans. Here is how I read a kitchen, and it is the same way I have learned to read a room. A dish will tell you everything the cook will not. I can taste fear in a sauce, the way somebody rushed it because they got behind. I can taste laziness, a roux that came out of a bucket instead of out of 45 patient minutes. I can taste love, and I can taste its absence. My grandmother used to hold a spoon to my lips when I was 6 years old and say, "What is missing, baby? Not what is wrong, what is missing?" There is a difference, and learning it took me my whole life. A kitchen cannot lie to me. I wish people were that honest. People, I have found, will look you dead in the eye and tell you a story their own hands already gave away. The man who came to my kitchen was named Damon Wexler. If you watch the cooking shows, you might know the face. Silver hair, very white teeth, the kind of confidence that comes with a camera following you for 15 years. He had been a real chef once, a good one, before he became a brand. Now he was the culinary director of a thing called Halcyon Hospitality Group, which owned restaurants in a dozen cities and was looking to own more. Halcyon had reached out to me through a polite young woman with a clipboard, and the message was flattering on its face. They wanted to talk about a partnership. They wanted to take a concept like mine and, in their words, scale it. They wanted to put Filomena's, or something like it, in airports and downtowns and resort lobbies all over the country. I said, "Come on by during service and see what we do." Tasting menu. On the house. Bring whoever you need to bring. They came on a Friday, the busiest night of my week. Damon Wexler walked into my dining room with 2 other people from Halcyon, including a quiet woman named Margot Delcroix, who, I would learn, actually ran the company. I came out from the back to greet them, in my whites, with my name stitched in script over my heart, with flour still on my forearms because I had been making biscuits 20 minutes before. I put out my hand. Damon Wexler shook it the way you shake the hand of a hostess. Then he looked over my shoulder, into the open kitchen, where my sous-chef Cody was working the saucier station. A young white man, 28 years old, good hands, still learning. And Damon Wexler smiled wide and said, "Ah, and there's the man with the magic. Is that the chef?" Cody, to his credit, looked like he wanted the floor to open and take him. He glanced at me. I gave him the smallest shake of my head, the one that says, "Keep cooking. I have got this." Because I have got this. I have had this my whole life. I did not correct him right away. I want you to understand that was a choice, not a failure of nerve. When you have been in enough of these rooms, you learn that the first assumption a person makes about you is the most honest thing they will say all night. So I let it sit. I said, "Why don't I bring you all back to see the kitchen?" And we got them set up at the chef's counter, the best seats in the house, right at the pass where the plates come up under the heat lamps. For the next 2 hours, I cooked for those people the best food of my life. And Damon Wexler spent those 2 hours talking to Cody. He asked Cody about the gumbo. He asked Cody where he had trained. He complimented Cody on the seasoning of the smothered chicken. My grandmother's recipe, the one I make in her skillet, the dish that put the magazine cover in the window by my front door. Cody kept trying to gesture toward me, and Damon kept not seeing it, the way some people simply cannot see a thing their mind has already decided is not there. When I set a plate in front of Damon Wexler myself and named the dish and named the technique, he nodded at me kindly, the way you nod at a server, and then he turned right back to Cody and said, "Your chef has a real touch with acid." Your chef, to me, about me. It got worse before it got better, the way these things tend to. Halfway through the service, one of the halcyon assistants, a young man glued to a tablet, caught my sleeve as I came around the pass and asked me, real polite, if I could have somebody bring more cornbread to the table and maybe top off their water glasses. He thought I was floor staff, in my own restaurant, in my chef's whites, with my name on the door he had just walked through. I said, "Of course," and I sent the cornbread out myself, because I was not about to make that boy feel small for a thing his boss had taught him by example. But I felt it. You always feel it. It sits down somewhere behind your ribs and it waits. And then Damon Wexler did the thing I think about the most. He called out toward the open kitchen, loud and warm and generous, and he said, "Can we get the chef out here a second? I want to shake the man's hand." He wanted to give Cody a moment. He wanted a photograph. And there I stood, 4 feet from him, the chef, already out here, already shaking hands he did not know were mine. If you are listening to this right now and your jaw has gone tight, if you know this exact feeling in your own body, do me one small favor. Just type the word "scene" down in the comments. Not for me, for you. So the next person scrolling past knows they were never the only one who stood in a room they built with their own hands and watched the whole thing get handed to somebody else. Cody finally could not stand it. He opened his mouth to set them straight, and I caught his eye across the line, and I shook my head one more time, slow, because I had decided something by then that I did not have words for yet. I was not going to be introduced. I was going to be tasted. There is a difference between those two things, and it turned out to be the whole difference in the world. Margot Delcroix watched all of this. I caught her eye once across the counter, and I saw something move behind it, but she did not say anything yet. Now, here is where I have to be honest about the small things, because the small things are the whole thing. Nobody called me a name. Nobody said anything you could have written down and shown to a judge. That is exactly how it works. It is a man shaking your hand like a coat check and then handing your life's work as a compliment to the boy beside you. It is being called by your first name. Verna, did you train here? While the young man gets called chef. It is the surprise on a face, quickly hidden, when it turns out the cooking they have been praising came out of your hands and not the hands they expected. Each piece of it is so small that if you said anything, you would be the one who made it weird. You would be the one who could not take a compliment. so you swallow it, and you plate the next course, and you smile, because the alternative is to spend your one life explaining your own existence to people who decided not to see you before they tasted a thing. I have swallowed a lot in 30 years. I am good at it. That night, I told myself I would swallow this one too. Take their money and let them think whatever they wanted to think. What did it matter who they thought made the gumbo, as long as the deal got done and my crew got taken care of? That is the lie I almost let myself believe. Let me tell you what broke it. Near the end of the night, Damon Wexler leaned back in his chair, full and happy, and he started talking about his vision. He told me, finally addressing me directly, that the food was, and I am quoting him, surprisingly elevated for something so home-style. He said that was a compliment, and I believe he believed it was. Then he told me what Halcyon wanted. They wanted to build the concept out. They wanted a signature dish they could put on every menu in every city, something with a story, something that photographed well. And they had already developed it, he said. Their culinary team had been working on it for months. He wanted me to taste it, to bless it, to sign on as the name and the face while their kitchens did the volume. He said, "We have got a test kitchen working on a gumbo that is going to define the brand." He said it like he was handing me a gift. And the kitchen in my chest went still, the way the line goes still for half a second between the last plate of one rush and the first ticket of the next. Because I knew, before I tasted a single thing, what that gumbo was going to be. It was going to be mine. They had been in my dining room for months before this night, eating, photographing, sending samples to a lab. They had taken my grandmother's gumbo, the one I built from a roux you have to stand over and pray over, and they had handed it to a test kitchen to reverse engineer into something a line cook could pour out of a tub in 90 seconds. They wanted the soul of the thing without the woman who had the soul. They wanted Philomena's without Philomena, without me. I went home that night and I did not sleep. I sat at my own kitchen table at 2 a.m. with my grandmother's skillet in my lap, running my thumb over the surface she had spent 50 years seasoning. And I tried to talk myself into it one more time. The money was real. The money would have set my crew up for life. It would have put my name in airports from here to Seattle. My grandmother never had her name on anything, I told myself. Maybe this is how you make sure ours does not get forgotten. Maybe you take the deal and you let them carry the name, even if they cannot carry the cooking. I am not going to pretend I am above the temptation of a check that big. I sat in that chair and I got small. I told myself that being seen did not matter, that only the work mattered, that a grown woman should be past needing the room to know her name. I almost picked up the phone right then and left Damon Wexler a message saying yes. I want to be fair to the woman who almost said yes, because she was not a fool. She was just tired. She was doing the math every woman like me has done at 2 a.m. The math where you set your own dignity on one side of the scale and your payroll on the other. I had 22 people whose rent ran partly through my hands. I had a dishwasher with a brand new baby girl. I had a young cook I had not even promoted yet who deserved a future I could not promise her on the thin margins of one corner restaurant. A check that size is not vanity. A check that size is health insurance and college funds and a soft place to land for people you love. So when I tell you I almost took it, understand I am not confessing a weakness. I am telling you the price of saying no was real, and I knew it down to the dollar. And I sat in that chair with my grandmother's skillet on my knees, and I held that price in both my hands for a long time before I made myself set it back down. Then I did a thing I have done since I was 6 years old. I touched my tongue to the memory of my grandmother's gumbo, the real one, and I asked her question. Not what is wrong with this deal, what is missing? And the answer came back so plain it almost made me laugh. What is missing is me. What is missing is the 45 minutes over the roux. What is missing is the hand that knows when the okra is right by the sound it makes. You can sell a recipe. You cannot sell the cook. And a gumbo without the cook is just brown water with a story stapled to it. They were going to put my grandmother's name on an empty pot, and I had almost handed it to them with a smile. I put the skillet back on the shelf. I made a decision. I was going to go to that tasting, and I was going to let the food do what the food always does. I was going to let it tell the truth. The tasting was the following Thursday at a gleaming halcyon test kitchen across town, all stainless steel and recessed lighting, and not one window. Damon Wexler was there in a fresh apron he had clearly never sweated in. Margot Delcroix was there, watching. The way she watched. There were a few other halcyon people with tablets, and there was a chef from their corporate team standing proud over a pot, ready to present the gumbo that was going to define the brand. They ladled it into little white bowls, the way you do for a tasting, and they passed them around, and everybody made the sounds people make. Oh, that is good. That is really good. Damon Wexler beamed. He looked at me and he said, "Well, Verna, what do you think?" And I could hear underneath it the thing he expected. He expected me to be grateful. He expected the home-style woman to be amazed at what real chefs with real resources had done with her little idea. I picked up the spoon. I did not rush. My grandmother taught me you taste with your whole attention or you do not taste at all. I let it sit on my tongue. I closed my eyes, not for show, but because that is how I listen. And I want to tell you, it was not bad. That is the part people get wrong. It was not garbage. It was competent. It was the work of trained people who knew what gumbo was supposed to be shaped like. But a kitchen cannot lie to me, and this kitchen was lying. I set the spoon down. The room got quiet, and I told them the truth. Gently, the way my grandmother held that spoon to my lips. I said, "Your roux came out of a container. I can taste it. A roux you stand over goes past blonde, past peanut, all the way down to the color of an old penny, and it takes the better part of an hour and your whole arm. And somewhere in that hour, it stops smelling like flour and starts smelling like toasted pecans and patience. Yours never got there. Yours got close, and somebody got nervous and pulled it early, probably because the recipe gave them a number of minutes instead of a color to wait for. I said your Trinity went in raw out of a bag, pre-diced this morning, so it is wet. It never sweated down. It never gave up its sugar. I said you used a stock from a base, not from bones, and there is a metallic note underneath everything because of it. I said, and you are missing the one thing my grandmother never wrote down because you cannot write it down. The gumbo is finished off the heat with a hand that knows the exact second to stop. And nobody at this stove tonight has stood over a pot long enough to feel that second in their bones. I said all of that without raising my voice, because I did not need to. The food had already said the loud part. Damon Wexler's smile had gone thin, he said, with a little edge now. Well, that is easy to critique. Cooking at this volume is a different discipline. I would love to see you actually make it better in a working kitchen, not just talk about it. And the Lord forgive me, but I had been waiting for him to say exactly that. I took off my jacket. I asked the corporate chef for his station, and I asked one of the halcyon people to please go out to my car and bring in the heavy black skillet on the passenger seat, because I do not cook my grandmother's gumbo in anybody else's pan. For the next hour, in a kitchen built by people who had decided what I was before I opened my mouth, I made my grandmother's gumbo. I made the roux from scratch, and I stood over it, and I did not look at a clock. And when the smell changed, when it turned from raw to toasted, I saw two of the younger halcyon cooks drift over without meaning to, the way cooks do when something real is happening. One of them, a girl who could not have been more than 22, drifted close and asked me how I would know when the roux was done if the recipe did not give her a number. And I told her the truth my grandmother told me at her own stove. The recipe will never tell you. It gives you minutes because it does not trust you yet. You wait on the color and you wait on the smell. And one day, after you have scorched enough of them and scraped enough ruined pots and started over enough times, your own nose will know before your eyes do. And that is the morning you stop being a person who follows a recipe and start being a cook. She wrote it down on the back of her hand. I hope she never washed it off. I sweated the Trinity down slow. I built the stock that morning from bones because I had known, walking in, what I was going to need. I let the whole thing come together with the kind of attention you cannot fake and cannot scale and cannot put in a tub. And then, off the heat, with my grandmother standing in my hands the way she always does. I finished it. I felt the second. I stopped. I ladled it into the same little white bowls. I passed them around myself, and I watched a room full of people who did business for a living go silent over a bowl of brown soup. Because the difference between the two gumbos was the difference between a photograph of a person and the person walking into the room. Margot Delcroix was the first one to speak. She set down her spoon, and she looked at me, and she said, very quietly, "That is not the same dish." And then she looked at Damon Wexler, and she said, "That is not even close, Damon." And the way she said his name, I understood at last who was really in charge in that company. And it was not the silver hair and the white teeth. Damon Wexler tasted it. I will give him this. He is enough of a chef, somewhere down under all the brand, that he could not pretend. He tasted it, and his face did the thing I had been waiting on, the thing where a person's own mouth tells them something their pride does not want to hear. He set the spoon down. He did not apologize, not really. Men like that almost never do, and I had stopped needing them to a long time ago. What he said was, "We misread this." He looked at me, and for the first time all night, he actually saw me. He said, "We misread you." That was the closest thing to sorry I was going to get. And it was enough, because it was true. Then Margot Delcroix made me the real offer, the one Damon had never been authorized to make. She offered me more money than I had ever held in my mind at once, and she offered it the right way this time, not for my name on their cooking, for me, for my kitchens, my training, my standards, my crew. She wanted to do it slow, she said, the way the food demanded. She wanted me to teach their people to wait for the color of the penny. And I want to tell you, I thought about it for a good long minute, because it was a beautiful offer, and it came from someone who had finally tasted the truth. But I said no. I said no, because I had spent the whole week learning something I should have known going in. The thing that makes Philomena's worth wanting is the exact thing you cannot put in an airport. It is one woman in one kitchen who learned at one stove from one grandmother. And the second you spread that across a dozen cities, you have got the photograph again, and not the person. I told Margot Delcroix that I was honored, and that I meant it, and that the kindest thing I could do for my grandmother's name was to keep it small enough to stay true. Some things are not supposed to scale. Some things are supposed to be cooked by a hand that knows the second to stop. I drove home with my skillet on the seat beside me, and I felt lighter than I had in years. Here is the part I am proudest of, and it has nothing to do with Damon Wexler. The Monday after, I came into Philomena's early, before the crew, and I stood in my own kitchen, in the spot in front of the stove where the heat lays itself across your face, and I thought about how close I had come to selling the soul of it for the dignity of being known by people who were never going to know me anyway. And I made myself a promise about the people who actually do know me. That afternoon, I called my line cook Janelle into my office. Janelle is 24, a black girl from the 9th Ward with a tongue as good as mine was at her age, and a fear in her eyes that I recognized from my own mirror 30 years ago. The fear that the room is going to decide what you are before you get to show it. I told her I was making her my chef de cuisine. I told her she would run this pass beside me and learn every dish I have, including the one with no recipe, the one you finish off the heat with a hand that knows. And then I took my grandmother's skillet down off the shelf, and I did not give it to her, because that skillet is mine until I am gone. But I let her cook in it. I stood beside her, and I held the spoon to her lips, and I asked her my grandmother's question. Not what is wrong, what is missing? And I watched her learn to hear the answer. A man with silver hair and a national company walked into my kitchen and asked the wrong person to go fetch the chef. He was not cruel about it. He was just so sure. And being sure is its own kind of blindness, the kind that lets you praise a woman's life's work to the boy standing next to her and never once feel the floor move under you. I did not need to humiliate him. I did not raise my voice or call him a name or post a thing about it online. I just let him taste the truth. Because in my world, the truth is a thing you can put on a spoon. The food does not care how sure you are. The food does not care about your camera or your company or your assumptions about who belongs in front of which stove. Heat finds out who you are. It always has. So let me ask you something, and take your time with it. What is the thing you make with your own 2 hands that somebody else got the credit for, or got the praise for, while you stood right there in your whites with the flour still on your arms? What did you build that they tried to scale into something thinner? Tell me about it down below. Tell me the dish, the design, the deal, the lesson, the song, whatever it is you cook that nobody can cook the same. I am asking because I think there are a lot of us standing in the hottest spot in the room, doing the work, watching somebody else get handed the compliment. And I think we ought to know each other. My grandmother left me a strong back and a good tongue and a cast iron skillet she seasoned for 50 years. She never got her name on a single thing, but I learned this from her, and I will leave it with you. You cannot buy seasoning. You cannot rush a roux or a person into being what they are not. And nobody, no matter how famous, no matter how sure, gets to tell you that the thing you cooked with your own patient hands is small. You stood over it. You waited for the color of the penny. You felt the second to stop. That is not home style, baby. That is mastery. And mastery does not need the loud people in the room to know it. It just needs to taste like the truth. I am Verna Toussaint. The kitchen is still mine, and the gumbo is still made by hand.